What happens when the very people who should lift you up decide to tear you down? When those closest to you become the biggest obstacles standing between you and your dreams? This is the story of Maria Santos, a young woman whose determination burned so bright that even when her own teammates tried to extinguish it, she found a way to shine brighter than ever before. In a world where success is often measured by the shoes on your feet, Maria proved that true victory comes from the strength within your heart. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought against opponents on the field, but against the doubt, jealousy, and cruelty of those who should be your allies. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not with words, but with bare feet hitting the ground in perfect rhythm, carrying you toward a finish line that others never believed you could reach. This is a story about betrayal and triumph, about how the human spirit can transform pain into power, and how sometimes losing everything you think you need is exactly what it takes to discover everything you actually have. Maria Santos had always been different from the other girls in her small mountain village of San Miguel. While they played with dolls and learned to cook traditional meals, she was out running through the dusty streets, her bare feet slapping against the cobblestones with a rhythm that seemed to match the beating of her heart. Her mother, Elena, would watch from their tiny kitchen window, shaking her head with a mixture of pride and worry. The Santos family lived in a modest adobe house on the outskirts of the village, where her father, Carlos, worked as a mechanic in the local garage. Money was always tight, but love was abundant. Carlos had been a runner himself in his youth, competing in local races before an injury ended his dreams. When he saw his daughter's natural talent emerging, something long dormant in his heart began to stir again. Every morning before school, Maria would wake at dawn and run the winding mountain trails that surrounded their village. She had no formal training, no coach, no proper equipment. Her running shoes were hand-me-downs from her older brother, held together with tape and prayers. But none of that mattered when her feet hit the ground. When she ran, the world made sense. The poverty, the limitations, the whispers about what girls from their village could or couldn't achieve, all of it fell away, leaving only the pure joy of movement. The first time anyone outside her family noticed her talent was during the annual village festival. The local school had organized a race for the children, a simple loop around the central plaza. Maria had never competed before, but her teacher, Senora Gutierrez, encouraged her to participate. As the starting whistle blew, Maria held back, unsure and nervous. But as the other children surged ahead, something instinctive took over. Her legs found their natural rhythm, and she began to move. One by one, she passed the other runners. Not with desperate sprinting, but with a smooth, effortless stride that seemed almost mystical to those watching. Her breathing remained steady, her form natural and beautiful. By the time she crossed the finish line, she was so far ahead that the second-place finisher was still rounding the final corner. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, then erupted in amazed cheers. Word of Maria's victory spread quickly through the village and beyond. Within a week, a representative from the regional athletics program had driven the winding mountain road to San Miguel to meet this remarkable young runner. His name was Coach Rodriguez, a former Olympic athlete who now scouted talent for the national youth program. He was a tall, imposing man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years dedicated to the sport. When Coach Rodriguez watched Maria run, he saw something that took his breath away. It wasn't just her speed, though that was impressive. It was her natural biomechanics, the way her body seemed perfectly designed for running. Her stride was efficient and powerful, her breathing controlled, her mental focus absolute. In 30 years of coaching, he had seen many talented runners, but rarely had he encountered such raw, untrained brilliance. The coach spoke with Maria's parents for hours that evening, sitting around their small wooden table as Elena served coffee and homemade tortillas. He explained the opportunities that existed for Maria if she was willing to train seriously. There was a regional training center 3 hours away in the city, where she could work with proper coaches, have access to real equipment, and compete against other talented young athletes. The catch was that she would need to live there during the week, only coming home on weekends. For Carlos and Elena, the decision was agonizing. Maria was only 14, and the thought of sending their daughter away was heartbreaking. But they could see the fire in their daughter's eyes when Coach Rodriguez spoke about her potential. They had raised her to dream big, and now those dreams were calling her away from home. Maria herself felt torn between excitement and fear. The village was all she had ever known. Her friends, her family, The familiar trails she had run thousands of times. Leaving it all behind felt like jumping off a cliff. But, deep in her heart, she knew this was her chance. The chance to see how far her legs could carry her, how fast her heart could beat, how big her dreams could grow. The night before she was scheduled to leave for the training center, Maria couldn't sleep. She slipped out of the house and ran her favorite mountain trail one last time under the stars. The path wound through pine forests and past a small waterfall where she often stopped to rest. As she ran, she made herself a promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how difficult the training became or how homesick she felt, she would never give up on her dreams. When she returned home that night, she found her father waiting for her on the front porch. Carlos had been working extra shifts for months, saving every peso he could. In his weathered hands, he held a small box. Inside was a pair of real running shoes, not expensive ones, but new ones, bought specifically for her. They were simple and white, with blue stripes down the sides. To Maria, they looked like the most beautiful things she had ever seen. As she laced up those shoes for the first time, Carlos put his hand on her shoulder. His voice was thick with emotion as he told her how proud he was of her courage, how amazed he was by her talent, and how much he believed in her future. He had never been able to chase his own running dreams to their conclusion, but watching his daughter prepare to chase hers filled him with a joy deeper than any victory he had ever experienced himself. The next morning, Coach Rodriguez arrived to drive Maria to her new life. As their truck pulled away from the village, Maria pressed her face to the rear window, watching her parents grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The familiar mountains of her childhood faded into the distance, replaced by new landscapes, new possibilities, and new challenges that would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. At the training center, Maria discovered a world she had never known existed. There were track facilities with perfect surfaces, weight training equipment, sports medicine specialists, and nutritionists who planned every meal. But more than the facilities, there were other runners, dozens of talented young athletes from across the region, all chasing similar dreams. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The training was more intense than anything Maria had ever experienced. Long runs that pushed her cardiovascular system to its limits, speed work that left her legs burning, strength training that revealed muscles she didn't know she had. Her body, which had always responded so naturally to running, now screamed with fatigue and soreness. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that tested her. Living away from home for the first time, sharing a dormitory with girls who came from different backgrounds and had different goals, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of competitive athletics. All of it was difficult for a village girl who had grown up in a world where everyone knew everyone else. Some of the other athletes came from wealthy families in the city. They had been training since they were small children, had expensive equipment, and spoke casually about international competitions they had watched or attended. Maria felt like an outsider, a mountain girl who had stumbled into a world where she didn't belong. The first real test came during a regional competition just 2 months after Maria's arrival at the center. It was her first race against runners from other training programs, her first time competing in a real stadium with electronic timing and official results. As she walked onto the track wearing her simple training outfit and her father's gift shoes, she could hear whispers from other teams about the unknown girl from the mountains. When the starting gun fired, Maria's nerves almost got the better of her. For the first time in her life, running didn't feel natural. Her stride was choppy, her breathing labored, her mind cluttered with doubt. She fell to the back of the pack, watching the other runners pull away with what seemed like effortless speed. But, as the race progressed, something shifted. The familiar rhythm of her heartbeat began to drown out the crowd noise. The feel of her feet striking the track awakened something deep and primal in her spirit. Gradually, naturally, Maria began to remember who she was and why she was there. One by one, she began to pass the other runners, her mountain-trained legs powering her forward with increasing confidence. When she crossed the finish line in second place, setting a personal best by nearly 30 seconds, the stadium erupted in surprised cheers. But Maria barely heard them. All she could think about was the phone call she would make to her parents that night, the joy she would hear in their voices when she told them about her race. That night, as she lay in her dormitory bed surrounded by the quiet breathing of her sleeping teammates, Maria realized that her journey was just beginning. She had proven to herself that she could compete at this level, that her village-trained talent could hold its own against city-trained technique. But she also understood that the real challenges lay ahead, and that the support of her family, combined with her own unshakable determination, would be the foundation of everything she hoped to achieve. Months turned into years at the training center. Maria's transformation from village runner to serious athlete was remarkable. Under Coach Rodriguez's guidance, her raw talent was refined and channeled into increasingly impressive performances. Her running times dropped consistently, her race strategy improved, and her understanding of competitive athletics deepened with every competition. The simple white shoes her father had given her became her trademark. While other athletes upgraded to the latest high-tech footwear, Maria remained loyal to those first racing shoes. She had them resoled twice, the leather carefully repaired, the laces replaced when they frayed. They had carried her through her first victory at the center, her first regional championship, and her first invitation to compete at the national level. They were more than shoes. They were a tangible connection to her family and her roots. By her third year at the center, Maria had established herself as one of the most promising middle-distance runners in the country's youth program. Her specialty was the 1,500 meters, a demanding race that required both speed and endurance, tactical intelligence, and raw courage. Her running style had evolved from the purely instinctive mountain running of her childhood into something more sophisticated while retaining its natural beauty and efficiency. Coach Rodriguez often marveled at how Maria seemed to improve not just physically, but mentally and emotionally with each passing month. The shy village girl had grown into a confident young woman who could handle the pressure of competition, the demands of intense training, and the complex social dynamics of elite athletics. She had learned to study her competitors, to develop race strategies, to push through pain barriers that would have stopped lesser athletes. Her success began to attract attention beyond the regional level. Sports journalists started writing about the remarkable young runner from the mountains, the girl who had emerged from nowhere to dominate her age group. Her story of humble beginnings and rapid rise captured the imagination of athletics fans across the country. Letters from admirers arrived at the training center, along with small sponsorship offers from local businesses who wanted to support her career. But with recognition came new pressures and new challenges. As Maria's reputation grew, so did the expectations placed upon her. Every race became more important, every performance more scrutinized. The casual joy of running that had characterized her early career was now tempered by the weight of other people's hopes and dreams. The most significant challenge came when she was selected for the national junior team that would compete at the Continental Championships. It was the opportunity she had dreamed of since arriving at the training center, the chance to represent her country on an international stage, to test herself against the best young runners from across the continent. The selection meant she would join a team of 12 athletes, all considered the future of their nation's athletics program. They would train together intensively for 3 months before the championships, working with the country's most elite coaches and sports science specialists. For Maria, it represented not just athletic advancement, but social and cultural challenges she had never faced before. The national team training camp was located in the capital city, in facilities that made the regional center look modest by comparison. The track was perfect, the gym equipment was state-of-the-art, the dormitories were luxurious. But more challenging than adapting to the upgraded facilities was adapting to her new teammates. Most of the other athletes on the national junior team came from privileged backgrounds. Their families had money, connections, and deep involvement in the athletics community. Several of their parents were former national team athletes themselves. They had grown up in a world of private coaches, international competitions, and expensive training camps. They spoke casually about trips to Europe for competitions, about equipment sponsorships, about university scholarship offers from prestigious institutions. Maria found herself increasingly isolated within the team, not because her teammates were deliberately cruel, but because she simply couldn't relate to their experiences or their casual assumptions about wealth and privilege. When they talked about skiing vacations or private tutors or their parents' professional careers, she had nothing to contribute. When they complained about minor inconveniences or expressed dissatisfaction with perfectly adequate equipment, she couldn't understand their perspective. The divide became most apparent around issues of equipment and presentation. While Maria continued to train in basic gear and her beloved white racing shoes, her teammates showcased the latest innovations in running technology. They wore compression garments that cost more than Maria's family spent on groceries in a month, used GPS watches that tracked every aspect of their training, and changed into new racing shoes for different types of workouts. Some of her teammates began to make subtle comments about Maria's appearance and equipment. They suggested that as a national team member, she had a responsibility to project a more professional image. They offered to help her shop for more appropriate training clothes, speaking in tones that were probably meant to be helpful, but felt condescending to Maria. The team captain was a girl named Isabella Morales, whose father was a successful businessman and former national team sprinter. Isabella was undeniably talented, but she had also grown up with every advantage that money and connections could provide. She had been competing internationally since she was 12, had trained with former Olympic coaches, and carried herself with the confidence that comes from never doubting that you belong in elite circles. Isabella wasn't malicious, but she had little understanding of or patience for anyone who hadn't grown up in her world. She viewed Maria's humble background and simple equipment not as inspirational, but as slightly embarrassing for the team. Her comments to Maria were always framed as helpful suggestions, but the underlying message was clear. Maria needed to upgrade her image if she wanted to fit in. The pressure to conform intensified as the Continental Championships approached. Team officials began discussing the importance of presenting a unified, professional appearance. There were meetings about team uniforms, about approved equipment sponsors, about the media appearances they would be expected to make. Maria felt increasingly out of place in these discussions, unsure how to navigate the commercial and social expectations that seemed to be as important as athletic performance. The breaking point came during a team meeting about racing equipment 3 weeks before the championships. The team coach, a stern woman named Patricia Vega, announced that all athletes would be required to wear shoes provided by the team's official sponsor for all competitions. The shoes were expensive, high-tech models that the sponsor wanted to showcase at the international event. For Maria, this presented a devastating dilemma. Her white racing shoes had carried her through every important race of her career. They were her connection to her father, her family, her journey from the village to this moment. They fit her perfectly, felt completely natural on her feet, and had never failed her in competition. The thought of abandoning them for unfamiliar shoes just before the most important competition of her life filled her with anxiety. She tried to explain her concerns to Coach Vega, speaking carefully about the sentimental value of her shoes and her worry about changing equipment so close to a major competition. But the coach was unmoved. Team unity and sponsor obligations were more important than individual preferences. Every athlete would wear the sponsor's shoes, without exception. That night, Maria called her parents from the dormitory phone, her voice tight with worry and homesickness. She tried to explain the situation without revealing how isolated and pressured she felt. Her father listened quietly, then reminded her of something he had told her years before. Champions aren't made by their equipment, but by what's inside them. Whatever shoes she wore, her heart and her legs would still be the same. His words helped, but they couldn't eliminate her anxiety about the upcoming competition. As she prepared for bed, Maria looked at her white racing shoes sitting beside her bed. They seemed so humble and simple compared to the gleaming high-tech shoes her teammates were excited about wearing. For the first time since arriving at the training center, she began to doubt whether she really belonged on this team, whether a village girl could truly compete at the highest levels of international athletics. The doubt was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Throughout her career, Maria's confidence had grown from her ability to outwork and outperform athletes who had more advantages than she did. But now, surrounded by teammates who seemed to belong in this world in ways she didn't, that confidence was being tested. She decided to focus on what she could control: her training, her preparation, and her commitment to representing her country as well as she possibly could. Whatever shoes she wore, whatever equipment she used, her goal remained the same. She would run with everything she had, drawing on the strength her parents had given her and the dreams that had carried her from a dusty village street to the national team. As the championship approached, the team's training intensified. Long runs that tested their endurance, speed sessions that pushed their limits, technical drills that refined their racing tactics. Maria threw herself into the work with renewed determination, using the physical demands of training to quiet the doubts that sometimes crept into her mind during quiet moments. Her performances in training continued to impress the coaches. Despite her equipment concerns and social discomfort, she remained one of the fastest and most consistent runners on the team. Her 1,500-meter times were approaching the national junior record, and her tactical awareness had developed to match her physical gifts. Whatever else was happening, her running remained pure and powerful and true The Continental Championships were to be held in Santiago, Chile, bringing together the finest young athletes from across South America. For Maria, it represented not just her first major international competition, but a chance to prove that her years of sacrifice and dedication had been worthwhile. The pressure she felt was immense, but it was matched by her excitement at finally having the opportunity to test herself against the continent's best runners. As the team prepared for their departure, the dynamics within the group became more complex and strained. The athletes were dealing with their own pre-competition nerves, and some channeled that anxiety into increased focus on team unity and conformity. Isabella Morales had essentially appointed herself as the unofficial team supervisor, constantly reminding everyone about proper protocol and professional behavior. Maria tried to stay focused on her training and ignore the social undercurrents, but it became increasingly difficult. During their final training camp, small incidents began accumulating that left her feeling more isolated than ever. Her teammates made jokes about her simple training clothes that weren't quite cruel enough to be called bullying, but weren't kind either. They spoke constantly about social media followers and endorsement opportunities, topics that held no interest or relevance for Maria. The most painful moment came during a team dinner when Isabella was describing the international competitions she had attended with her family as a spectator. She mentioned casually how important it was for athletes to present themselves properly at such events, to understand that they were representatives not just of their athletic ability, but of their country's image. Her eyes settled on Maria as she spoke, and the implication was clear even though she never spoke directly. Maria excused herself from the dinner early and went for a solitary run around the training camp. As her feet found their familiar rhythm on the darkened paths, she tried to sort through her emotions. Part of her was angry at the subtle condescension she was experiencing. Part of her was hurt by the rejection from athletes she had hoped would become friends and training partners. But, mostly, she was determined to prove that her talent spoke louder than her humble background. When she returned from her run, she found Coach Rodriguez waiting for her outside the dormitory. The older man had been observing the team dynamics and was concerned about Maria's state of mind heading into such an important competition. They sat together on a bench overlooking the training track, and he asked her directly about how she was handling the pressure and the social challenges. Maria had always been honest with Coach Rodriguez, and she didn't hold back now. She told him about feeling like an outsider, about the pressure to change her equipment and her appearance, about the doubts that were creeping into her mind despite her strong training performances. She admitted that she was starting to wonder whether she was good enough not just athletically, but socially and culturally, to succeed at the international level. Coach Rodriguez listened without interrupting, then shared some perspective from his own athletic career. He had grown up in similar circumstances to Maria, had faced similar doubts and challenges when he first started competing at elite levels. He reminded her that her value as an athlete and as a person had nothing to do with her teammates' opinions or her family's economic situation. Her worth was demonstrated every time she stepped onto a track and raced with the heart and determination that had carried her from her village to the national team. His words were reassuring, but they couldn't completely ease Maria's anxiety as the team departed for Santiago. The flight was her first time leaving her home country, and everything about the experience felt overwhelming. The airport, the airplane itself, the different language and currency they encountered upon arrival, all of it reinforced her sense of being out of her element. The championship's venue was magnificent and intimidating. The stadium held 40,000 spectators, the track surface was perfect, and the warm-up facilities were better than anything Maria had ever experienced. Athletes from across the continent were arriving daily, each national team bringing their own energy and expectations to the event. During the team's first training session at the championship venue, Maria finally had the chance to observe the competition she would be facing. The quality was immediately apparent. These were athletes who had been shaped by excellent coaching, superior facilities, and years of international experience. Their warm-up routines were precise and professional, their equipment was uniformly excellent, and they carried themselves with the confidence of athletes who belonged on this stage. Maria's self-doubt began to resurface as she watched her competitors effortlessly execute training drills that required her complete concentration. These athletes made everything look easy in a way that reminded her how much she still had to learn about competing at the international level. When she tried to match their pace during a shared warm-up run, She found herself working harder than she had expected just to keep contact with the group. That evening, alone in the room she shared with Isabella, Maria examined her race preparation one final time. Her training log showed that she was in the best shape of her life. Her times in practice had been consistently excellent, and her tactical understanding of the 1500 meters had never been better. Objectively, she knew she belonged in this competition. But, subjectively, surrounded by athletes who seemed so polished and professional, she struggled to maintain her confidence. The night before her race, Maria called her parents from the team hotel. Hearing their voices helped settle her nerves somewhat, but she could detect their own anxiety beneath their encouraging words. They were following the championships on radio and internet, gathering with neighbors in their village to cheer for their daughter. The knowledge that so many people were counting on her added another layer of pressure to an already stressful situation. After ending the call, Maria tried to sleep, but found herself tossing restlessly in bed. Isabella was sleeping peacefully beside her, seemingly untroubled by any pre-competition nerves. Maria envied her teammates' apparent calm, wondering if confidence was something that could only be learned through years of privilege and international experience. She finally gave up on sleep and slipped quietly out of the room. The hotel corridors were dimly lit and silent, creating an almost ghostly atmosphere that matched her unsettled mood. She made her way to a small balcony overlooking the city, where she could see the lights of Santiago stretching toward the mountains in the distance. As she stood there in the cool night air, Maria tried to reconnect with the pure love of running that had started her on this journey. She thought about those early morning runs through her village, when running was simply the thing that made her feel most alive. She remembered the joy on her father's face when he had given her those first racing shoes, the pride in her mother's voice when she called home with news of her victories. Gradually, her perspective began to shift. The pressure she was feeling, the doubts about whether she belonged, all of it was based on other people's expectations and standards. But her ability to run, her capacity for speed and endurance and tactical intelligence, those things belonged to her regardless of her background or her equipment or her teammates' opinions. When she finally returned to her room, Maria felt more centered than she had in weeks. She looked at her white racing shoes sitting by her bed, waiting for tomorrow's competition. They might not be the latest technology, but they had carried her through every important victory of her career. Whatever happened in the race, she would run with everything she had, trusting in the preparation that had brought her to this point. The morning of the competition dawned clear and warm, perfect conditions for fast racing. As Maria went through her pre-race routine, light breakfast, easy warm-up jog, dynamic stretching, she felt her nerves settling into the familiar pre-competition focus that she had learned to trust and appreciate. The team meeting before heading to the stadium was brief and businesslike. Coach Vega reminded each athlete of their race strategy and tactical goals, emphasizing the importance of competing with intelligence as well as courage. When she spoke to Maria, her tone was encouraging but realistic. She acknowledged that this was a step up in competition level, but expressed confidence in Maria's preparation and ability. As they boarded the team bus for the stadium, Maria felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded important competitions. Her teammates chatted nervously among themselves, but she preferred to stay quiet, using the travel time to mentally rehearse her race plan and visualize herself executing it successfully. The stadium was already busy with early events when they arrived, the sounds of starting guns and cheering crowds creating an energetic atmosphere that both thrilled and intimidated Maria. As she walked through the athlete entrance for the first time, wearing her national team uniform and carrying her simple equipment bag, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with determination to prove that she deserved to be there. The warm-up track was crowded with athletes from every competing nation, all going through their final preparations for the day's events. Maria found a quiet section where she could complete her routine without distraction, focusing on loosening her muscles and settling her mind for the challenge ahead. As she changed into her racing spikes, those familiar white shoes that had become such a contentious issue, she said a small prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The morning of the 1,500-meter final arrived with an electric atmosphere in the stadium. Maria had successfully navigated through the preliminary rounds, running tactical races that conserved her energy while ensuring her advancement. Her times had been solid if not spectacular, but she had demonstrated the racing intelligence and competitive maturity that Coach Rodriguez had worked so hard to develop in her. As she went through her pre-race routine, Maria felt more confident than she had since arriving in Santiago. The preliminary races had shown her that she belonged in this competition. Her times were comparable to the other finalists, and her tactical awareness had served her well in the tight, tactical heats that had eliminated several favored athletes. The 8 finalists represented the best young 1,500-meter runners on the continent. There was the defending champion from Brazil, known for her devastating finishing kick. The Argentine runner who held the Continental Junior record. A talented Colombian who had already broken her national senior record despite being only 17. And Maria, the quiet girl from the mountains who had somehow worked her way into this elite group. In the athlete preparation area beneath the stadium, Maria went through her final warm-up routine with methodical precision. Light jogging to activate her cardiovascular system, dynamic stretching to prepare her muscles, several practice starts to dial in her race reflexes. Everything felt perfect. Her body was responding exactly as it should, her mind was calm and focused, and her confidence was building with each passing minute. It was then that Isabella Morales approached her with an expression that Maria couldn't quite read. Isabella had been eliminated in the semifinals, a disappointing result that had left her frustrated and searching for explanations. As team captain, she still had responsibilities for the remaining team members, but her demeanor had grown increasingly cold since her own elimination. Isabella spoke quietly, so their conversation wouldn't be overheard by officials or other athletes. She told Maria that there had been a problem with her racing shoes. Apparently, the technical officials had raised questions about whether they met the current competition standards. The rules around shoe technology had been evolving rapidly, and there were concerns that Maria's older shoes might not be compliant with the latest regulations. Maria felt her stomach drop as Isabella continued explaining. The team manager was concerned about a potential disqualification if the shoes were challenged after the race. Since this was such an important competition, they had decided it would be safer for Maria to switch to a pair of the team-issued shoes that were guaranteed to be compliant. Isabella had brought a pair in Maria's size, fresh from the box, and properly certified for international competition. The timing couldn't have been worse. Less than an hour before the most important race of her career, Maria was being asked to abandon the shoes that had carried her through every significant victory of her running life. The new shoes were beautiful and clearly expensive, with advanced technology that was supposed to enhance performance. But they were completely unfamiliar, never worn in training or competition, and psychologically devastating to contemplate wearing. Maria tried to argue, explaining how important her own shoes were to her confidence, and how risky it seemed to change equipment so close to the race. But Isabella was insistent, speaking with the authority of her position as team captain and emphasizing the potential consequences of a rule violation. She made it clear that this wasn't a suggestion, it was a team decision that Maria was expected to follow. With growing anxiety, Maria examined the new shoes. They were certainly impressive from a technical standpoint, but they felt completely foreign on her feet. The fit was slightly different, the weight distribution unfamiliar. Even the way they flexed as she walked felt wrong. Every instinct told her this was a mistake, but the authority figures on her team were unanimous in their insistence that she make the change. As she laced up the unfamiliar shoes, Maria tried to convince herself that Isabella was right, that the technology would help her performance, that professional athletes changed equipment all the time, that her fears were just pre-race nerves getting the better of her. But as she took her first steps in the new spikes, her confidence began to crumble. The warm-up in the new shoes felt awkward and uncertain. Her stride rhythm was slightly different. Her foot strike wasn't quite right, and the unfamiliar sensation was throwing off her entire kinetic chain. She tried to adapt quickly, running several acceleration sprints to get used to the feel, but 30 minutes wasn't enough time to establish comfort with completely new equipment. What made the situation even worse was watching her white racing shoes disappear into Isabella's equipment bag. Those shoes represented everything about her journey from village runner to international competitor. They were her connection to her father's gift, her family's sacrifice, and her own remarkable progression as an athlete. Seeing them taken away felt like losing a piece of her identity just when she needed it most. As the call room time approached, Maria struggled to regain her mental composure. The shoes were just equipment, she told herself. Her training was still the same, her fitness was still excellent, and her race strategy remained sound. But the psychological impact of the change was profound. undermining her confidence in ways that went far beyond the physical discomfort of unfamiliar footwear. In the call room where finalists waited before being escorted to the track, Maria sat quietly, trying to center herself for the race ahead. The other athletes seemed calm and focused, going through their individual pre-race rituals with the confidence of athletes who had everything they needed to perform their best. Maria envied their apparent tranquility while she struggled with equipment that felt wrong and doubts that kept multiplying in her mind. When they were finally called to the track, Maria walked onto the famous Santiago Stadium surface wearing shoes that felt like they belonged to someone else. The crowd of 40,000 spectators created a wall of sound that was both inspiring and overwhelming. As she went through her final warm-up routine on the track, she tried desperately to adapt to the new shoes. But each stride reminded her of what had been taken away from her just before the most important race of her life. The race introduction was a blur of announcements in Spanish and Portuguese, each athlete's accomplishments read to the crowd as they waved acknowledgement to the cheering spectators. When Maria's name was announced, she raised her hand to the crowd but felt disconnected from the moment, as if she was watching someone else prepare for a race that should have been hers. As the athletes took their marks for the start, Maria tried one final time to find her composure. She had worked too hard and come too far to let equipment issues derail her performance. Whatever shoes she was wearing, her heart and legs were still the same. The speed that had carried her from village races to this international final was still there, waiting to be unleashed. But as she settled into her starting position, feeling the unfamiliar spikes against the track surface, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been taken from her. The shoes were more than equipment. They were her identity as a runner, her connection to her journey, and her source of confidence in moments of doubt. Without them, she felt exposed and vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with racing tactics or physical preparation. The starter began his final instructions, and Maria tried to focus on the race plan she had rehearsed hundreds of times in her mind. But even as she prepared to demonstrate everything she had learned about competitive running, she couldn't escape the devastating realization that her most trusted allies had betrayed her trust just when she needed their support most. The gun was about to fire, and Maria Santos was about to discover whether her talent and determination were strong enough to overcome not just the best young runners on the continent, but also the psychological devastation of having her confidence systematically undermined by the very people who were supposed to be supporting her dreams. As she waited for the starting signal, crouched in the familiar position that had launched hundreds of training runs and dozens of competitive races, Maria made a desperate internal commitment. Whatever happened in this race, whatever the outcome, she would run with everything she had. The shoes might be wrong, her confidence might be shaken, and her trust might be broken, but her spirit remained intact. She would prove to herself and to everyone watching that a runner's strength comes from within, not from what they wear on their feet. The stadium fell silent except for the starter's voice, and Maria Santos prepared to run the race that would define not just her athletic career, but her understanding of who she was and what she was capable of when everything else was stripped away. The starting gun cracked across the Santiago Stadium, and 8 of the continent's finest young runners surged forward into the opening meters of the 1,500-meter final. Maria's start was tentative, the unfamiliar shoes making her cautious about her foot placement as the field settled into racing formation. She found herself toward the back of the pack, a position she had never preferred but now seemed safer given her equipment concerns. The early pace was modest, as expected in a tactical final where positioning and timing would matter more than raw speed. The Brazilian defending champion took the lead, content to control the tempo, while the other runners jockeyed for optimal position behind her. Maria tried to stay relaxed and wait for her usual racing rhythm to emerge, but with each step, the wrong feel of her shoes reminded her that nothing about this race was going according to plan. As they passed through the first 400 meters, Maria began to notice something alarming. The new spikes weren't just uncomfortable, they were actually causing her problems. The slightly different fit was creating a hot spot on her left foot that was rapidly developing into a blister. Each foot strike was becoming more painful, and she could feel her natural stride beginning to compensate in ways that would affect her efficiency and speed. By 800 meters, the tactical phase of the race was ending, and the real competition was beginning. The pace quickened as runners began to position themselves for their decisive moves. Maria tried to move up with the field, but the pain in her left foot was becoming severe enough to affect her stride mechanics. She found herself favoring the injured foot, which threw off her rhythm and made it impossible to run with her usual smooth efficiency. At 1,000 meters, disaster struck. As Maria tried to respond to a surge by the Colombian runner, she felt something give way completely in her left shoe. The pain had become unbearable, and she could feel moisture that suggested the blister had broken open. Her stride became increasingly labored as she tried to continue racing while protecting the injured foot. Unable to maintain contact with the leaders, Maria faced a heartbreaking decision. She could continue suffering through the pain and finish far behind her capabilities, or she could find another solution. In a moment of pure instinct and desperation, she made a choice that would become legendary in athletic circles. Without breaking stride, Maria reached down and tore off both racing spikes, tossing them aside as she continued running. The cool stadium track surface against her bare feet was initially shocking, but within several strides, she felt a profound sense of relief and familiarity. This was how she had learned to run, barefoot on mountain trails, with nothing but the direct connection between her body and the ground beneath her. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. 40,000 spectators rose to their feet as they witnessed something unprecedented, an athlete abandoning her shoes mid-race and continuing to compete barefoot in an international final. The television commentators struggled to find words for what they were seeing, their voices rising with excitement and disbelief. But Maria heard none of it. As soon as her bare feet hit the track, her natural running rhythm returned with stunning suddenness. The pain was gone, the awkwardness disappeared, and she felt like herself again for the first time since warming up that morning. Her stride lengthened and smoothed out, her breathing settled into its familiar pattern, and her confidence came flooding back. With 400 meters remaining, Maria was still in last place, but beginning to move. Her barefoot stride was eating up ground with each step, her form as beautiful and efficient as it had ever been. The other runners, focused on their own tactical battles, didn't initially notice the girl running behind them without shoes. At 300 meters to go, the real race began as the leaders started their finishing kicks. But Maria was moving faster than anyone, her bare feet providing a connection to the track that felt more natural and powerful than anything she had experienced in racing spikes. She passed the 8th-place runner, then the 7th, her acceleration building with each stride. With 200 meters remaining, the crowd's cheering reached a crescendo as spectators realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Maria was flying past runners who had been ahead of her for most of the race, her barefoot stride covering ground with remarkable efficiency. Her face showed the intense concentration of an athlete in complete flow state, running with a freedom and power that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. The leaders finally became aware of the barefoot runner charging from behind, but it was too late to respond. Maria's finishing kick was devastating in its power and beauty. She passed the Colombian in lane 2, swept around the outside of the Brazilian champion, and entered the home straight in 2nd place with 80 meters to go. The stadium erupted in chaos as Maria drew even with the leader, a talented Mexican runner who had been saving her best for last. The two athletes raced stride for stride down the home straight, neither giving an inch, both running with courage and determination that embodied everything beautiful about competitive athletics. In the final 20 meters, Maria found another gear that she didn't know she possessed. Her bare feet seemed to provide extra spring and power with each step, propelling her past the Mexican runner and toward the finish line. As she crossed first, arms raised in triumph and disbelief, the stadium crowd delivered a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Maria's winning time was not just a personal best. It was a new Continental Junior record, achieved while running the final 400 meters barefoot. The accomplishment was unprecedented in modern athletics, a performance that combined extraordinary athletic ability with the kind of courage and adaptability that defines true champions. As she jogged slowly around the track after the race, still barefoot and still processing what had just happened, Maria was surrounded by athletes, coaches, and officials who wanted to congratulate her on one of the most remarkable victories in the history of youth athletics. Her teammates, including Isabella, approached with expressions of amazement and something that might have been shame. But Maria's first thought was of her parents, watching from their village thousands of miles away. She had won her first international title in the most dramatic fashion possible, proving that a runner's strength comes from within rather than from equipment or circumstances. She had discovered reserves of courage and determination that she hadn't known existed, and she had done it in a way that honored the barefoot mountain running that had started her journey. Later, in the quiet of the athlete recovery area, Maria learned the truth about her shoes. A fellow athlete from another country, who had witnessed the conversation between Maria and Isabella, approached her with disturbing information. There had been no rule violation, no technical concerns, no team decision about her equipment. The shoe change had been Isabella's personal decision, motivated by jealousy and a desire to sabotage Maria's performance. The betrayal was devastating to discover, but it couldn't diminish the victory. If anything, it made Maria's achievement even more remarkable. She had been deliberately undermined by someone she had trusted, but she had found a way to transform that betrayal into the fuel for the greatest performance of her career. As Maria stood on the podium later that evening, barefoot and wearing her gold medal, she thought about all the people who had supported her journey. Her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities. Coach Rodriguez, who had seen her potential when she was just a village girl with natural talent. All the people in her hometown who had gathered to listen to her race on the radio, cheering for her from thousands of miles away. She also thought about Isabella and the painful lesson about trust and human nature that she had learned. But even that betrayal had served a purpose, forcing her to discover inner resources she might never have accessed under normal circumstances. She had learned that true strength comes from within, that courage can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes losing everything you think you need is exactly what it takes to find everything you actually have. The victory changed everything for Maria. International scholarships materialized, professional opportunities emerged, and her story became inspiration for athletes around the world. But more important than any of that was what she had learned about herself in those final 400 meters of the race. She had discovered that her power as a runner came not from her equipment or her circumstances, but from her heart, her determination, and her willingness to adapt and overcome when everything seemed to be working against her. Years later, as she developed into one of the world's elite middle-distance runners, Maria would often train barefoot to remind herself of that breakthrough moment in Santiago. She kept her father's white racing shoes in a place of honor in her home, but she had learned that what made her special wasn't what she wore on her feet, but what she carried in her spirit. The girl who had hidden from her own teammates' betrayal had emerged victorious, not despite the obstacles they had placed in her path, but because those obstacles had forced her to discover just how powerful she truly was. In losing her shoes, she had found her strength. In facing betrayal, she had discovered courage. In running barefoot toward victory, she had proven that the most important equipment any athlete possesses is an unbreakable will to succeed.